Today's conversation crosses 20 years and an ocean. My guest is 31. I'm 52. She lives in Romania. I'm on the west coast of the US. And what we discovered in our prep call is that the gap between us is exactly the point. Because the patterns we're going to talk about today, the high functioning trap, the way attachment wires who we end up attracted to, the slow erosion of self trust we mistake for destiny, they don't care about generation. They show up in a 31-year-old psychologist living in Bucharest, and they show up in a woman my age who walked away from a 30-year career 9 months ago. And the work to get free from them looks remarkably similar, no matter where you are in the timeline. Welcome back to The Comeback Show. I'm Jenn Fast, midlife reinvention coach and mentor, and this is the space where we talk honestly about what it really looks and feels like to rebuild your life. After burnout, after big changes, after years of carrying things without the right support. Today's guest is Miriam Brait. She is a licensed psychologist in Romania and an attachment-focused, trauma-informed coach working with clients all over the world. She writes the Substack, Past the Past, where she explores attachment, complex trauma, and the long arc of relational healing at the intersection of psychology, neuroscience, and lived experience. Her work helps high-functioning women heal attachment wounds, leave survival mode behind, and build relationships that feel emotionally safe instead of emotionally consuming. She also, like me, has lived a version of what she now teaches, which is the part of any coach's story I trust the most. Miriam, welcome to The Comeback Show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I always like to start a conversation with someone's story because listeners can hear the difference between someone who's teaching from a distance and someone speaking from lived experience. Can you take us back to before this was your work? Like, where were you? What were you doing? And what was the experience that finally pushed you towards attachment and complex trauma as your specialty?
Well, I think the patterns were always there, but I wasn't able to see them until something I would call a very traumatic breakup. It was a certain point in my life where the things that I used to survive and to adapt to my environment no longer work. And I needed to seek help myself. I went to a therapist, and doing that, I realized that I really love learning about human behavior. I love to learning about how the mind works. And I also realized that I want to be in that journey for quite a while. I remember when I went to therapy, the first thing I said, I will never repeat that experience again. And something that experience taught me was that these patterns, they run so deep that even though sometimes we know what to do, it may still happen again. And that taught me to have a lot of patience with myself and others. So yeah, it was more like falling in love by accident with the field that I had to interact with because I was on my own journey. And the more time I spent in that, I realized, wait a second, I have spent so much time in this. I could actually return back to school and study it for real. And at some point, it also felt like I suffered for so long. I have all of this experience. Maybe I can transform this. Maybe I can use this as my life mission. Maybe I can really do something that feels really meaningful to me. Because before that, I was doing freelance writing, which was okay. I always loved to write, but I wasn't writing something that really interested me. I was working in marketing in a medical niche. It didn't have this greater sense of meaning, and it definitely didn't have the same emotional involved. So yeah, this is kind of what brought me here.
Well, a lot of coaches come at attachment from theory. You came at it from your own life first. How does going through your own healing actually shape the way that you work with a client?
Made me way more patient. When you read about attachment, you have all the courses. In 90 days, you're going to be secure. It's very hard for me to believe that regardless of what resources you have, you can undo 20, 30, 40 years, maybe more, of patterns in 30 days. There's no way you can have new relational experiences that are corrective and have this insight that you can actually apply in 30, 90 days. And another thing that helped me, and I think it helps me in my work with others as well, is the fact that with attachment it's on a spectrum. So we don't have to have the most wanted attachment to be secure all the time. We have to be in the good enough. And more often than not, the good enough is not as high as we think it is. So I don't think that one, it's something that can be changed overnight. And two, it doesn't even have to be that big of a change. Just good enough.
I like that. Good enough. Now, before we get into the heart of this conversation, I wanted to clear something up that you and I talked about before, because I think it really matters for everyone listening. You are a licensed psychologist in Romania, and you work as a coach with clients outside of Romania. Most listeners hear the word psychologist and coach, and they assume that they're interchangeable, but we know they're not. And I think it really helps a listener to know what each one is and what it isn't so she can find the right kind of support for what she actually needs right now. Can you help us understand the difference? Like, what does working with a therapist or a psychologist actually do? And what does working with a coach like you actually do? And when is one a better fit than the other?
The first requirement, so to speak, for coaching is to be somewhat stable. I think that if you are in a crisis, if you have severe anxiety, if you can get out of bed, coaching is definitely not for you. That would be something that a therapist, probably in person, would be best. Another thing is that in coaching, we focus on the past, but also on the present. So the person has to have the ability to process certain things, to be able to talk, and to be able to implement some of those things in the present. Because coaching is a little bit more action oriented than therapy. Therapy is more supportive and more focused on the past. Obviously, it does lead to changes in the present, but it's far more supportive than coaching. Coaching can also be very supportive, but it's also more action oriented. And it's definitely a good fit for people who can actually delve into that. Because for some people, it takes them years to even talk about certain things because they are so traumatic. So if you're able to talk about them, then it's probably something that you can also process safely, and then you are way closer to taking action. And that will
That
make it more suitable for coaching, I would say.
I think the only other thing I would add is, of course, the licensing requirement for a psychologist.
Yeah, we are all limited to our own countries. And from what I know in the United States, I think everyone is limited to the state. If you're in
Correct?
California or in
Yes.
any other state, you have to practice only in that state. So yeah.
Whereas coaching, you can work with anyone in the
Yeah,
world. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
For the listener right now who's wondering whether what's going on in her life is a therapy thing or a coaching thing, is there a question she can ask herself to figure that out?
Yeah, definitely. As I said before, it all depends on how functional you are and what are your desires. Is your desire to explore more, maybe with no clear goals and no expectations? Therapy can be more meandering, it doesn't really have clear goals. Where coaching is usually more action oriented, more we discuss goals in the beginning, the trajectory is more visible. In therapy, that doesn't really happen. It's more something like you stumble upon some things, but in coaching, we are more clear on what we want, even if those things sometimes do change.
Most of the women listening right now are in midlife, and a lot of them look fine on the outside. Their lives are organized, they're competent, they're the person everyone else relies on. But on the inside, they're quietly exhausted from holding it all together. When we talked offline, you kind of lit up around this. Can you tell us what's actually happening to this woman who looks fine on the outside but is exhausted on the inside? Is there a clinical version of what's happening versus the human version?
I think as women in this culture, where we now have more opportunities than ever, and in a way we want to prove that now we have this opportunity, the archetype of the woman really keeps herself together, but with great effort because there's a lot that's being done. From a point of view, I think it's also the archetype of woman who receives a lot to achieve. When we talk about self esteem, we talk about unconditional self worth and conditional self worth. A lot of parents think that unless they praise the kid for what the kid does, they're going to be lazy. So we have to praise and sometimes even punish kids for not doing well enough in school, for not doing this, for not doing that, thinking that we're going to raise up really resilient kids. And that's what's going to make them successful and happy. And as you mentioned, yes, in certain cases, that leads to children who grow up to be adults who are very functional, adults who are high achievers. My question would be, is that woman happy with what she has achieved, or she just conquered the mountain and now the next one comes into sight and the next one? And the mountains you climbed before, they're not even that valuable anymore. So I think in some sense, the women that are so focused on achievement are really good at validating themselves through conditional means and regulating their self-esteem through having constant input. I have to constantly prove myself, otherwise I forget that I am worthy. And I think the piece that is really missing is that unconditional self-worth. I am a human being and I don't have to earn my rest. The fact that I need to work is just a tool for me to survive. It's a tool. Sometimes it brings me other benefits as well, but work serves me. I don't serve work. And I think this can also expand relationships, not just work, because we can overfunction and do a lot and try a lot in our relationships as well. When I think about this woman that's a really high achiever, but it's really hard for her to stay there, I think of a woman who does a lot because she's trying to hold herself up to standards that feed her need for validation, because she doesn't have a system that self validates her. It's like having an imbalance. You need both internal validation and external. And when you don't have one, you overcompensate with the other.
I've never thought about it that way, but it makes a lot of sense actually. Now, on our video call, you said something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. You said we've turned ourselves into human doings instead of human beings, and that even our free time gets weaponized. Like we don't actually rest. We schedule a hobby or we go to the book club. The free time becomes another performance. Can you please say more about that?
Yeah, I think it's another learning of the fact that we constantly have to do something. Even our hobbies become accessories. Look how interesting I am because I'm reading all of these books. Or look how interesting I am because I am doing this sport. And maybe I don't even like this sport. But I have to do it because I have to prove myself that I work out, and I am keeping myself sharp because look at my bookshelf. I feel that it kind of fits into the same paradigm that we constantly have to prove ourselves. And it's something that permeates every layer of our existence. It's really good to ask the question, who are you trying to prove yourself to? And where does it end? Does it ever end?
Where do you think that equation of self-worth equals productivity actually come from? As in, how much of it is from your childhood and how much of it is just the environment you're living in now?
I think it starts in childhood. I think there are definitely parents who see their children as needing to earn love, sadly. Like, you have to be a good child. I'm going to be so upset if you're not doing this. And some parents maybe don't even want to send that message, but they are afraid that if they don't talk to their children that way, then the children is going to grow without having any sense of what's good and what's evil. And they have to keep the child in mind by saying, if you're doing that, mom is going to be really, really upset. Even if it's something small, something that doesn't have big relevance in the big picture. But I think that the people that raise us are not unique in their patterns, and they're not unique in the way they relate to the world. And we will find other people like our parents as adults. There are going to be people who, as adults, treat us as productivity machines. They want us to prove our worth. And if you're someone who kind of feels at ease with that, yes, I have to do this. Yes, I have to prove to my partner that I'm always polished, that I wake up like this, that I am this and that. Then, in a way, we naturally gravitate towards people like our parents who reinforce our life view that, yes, this is how life is. This is how I have to behave in relationships and even at work. And I think in certain companies, if not in most, that's considered like really good trait. Like, yeah, she's a really good worker. Look at her. And it's very beneficial not for the individual, but it's beneficial for the economy at large to keep those patterns alive.
I feel like I was a living example of this. There was a moment in my corporate years when I was 35 pounds heavier than I am now. My cholesterol was through the roof. I had even developed a heart condition and I couldn't stop working. Not wouldn't, I couldn't. Like my body was screaming at me, but I was still checking my emails. That's the trap, right? The body stops being subtle and you still don't believe that you're allowed to stop. There was also something you said about women playing by different rules, that we're alive in a moment with no real historical precedent, more freedom than women have ever had, and we're still growing into it. What did you mean by that?
When you mentioned your story and not being able to stop trying your body really sending you signals, I think it can be tied to what you asked me right now. For most of the human history, women were so oppressed and were told, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're not capable of this, you're not capable of that. I think we both have the pressure of our new freedom, which says you can be everything you want, and the pressure of the old mindset, which says you have to be the best mother, you have to stay in shape, you have to look in a certain way, you have to never age. So you have to be both a great worker, a great mom, and a mistress of some sort, the perfect lover for your partner. So when I think about that, I think about a woman who has three jobs versus a man who's like, okay, I'm going to have a clean shave, I'm going to dress well, and I'm going to go to work. And I think there's a big imbalance. We have the old pressures, some of the mindsets are still there, and we're not giving women a lot of help. But also, we have this newfound freedom, which tells women that, yes, you should really push yourself to prove yourself.
It all feels like a trap sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's a piece of it I want to go deeper on because I've lived it, and I think it's one of the cruelest versions. On our previous call, you said something to me that landed kind of hard. You said it's easier to leave a job that you're bad at. It's much, much harder to leave a job you're good at because then you have to walk away from all that validation, the income, the proof that you matter. Can you say more about that for us?
I think that's true for everything in our lives. So much of our coping mechanisms endure for so long because, in a way, they were adapted to us. They helped us survive. And as you mentioned, a job that you're good at, I mean, that feels great. Like, yeah, I'm going in a place where I'm paid well, I'm being appreciated, that's really hard to let go. And there are a lot of people who find it really hard to find that job and really struggle and are really happy when they find it and yes, this is really working for me. And I think there's also this narrative that you have to be grateful for something good. Like, why aren't you grateful? You have this and now you're just throwing it away. But what if that thing is literally killing me slowly? For every coping mechanism that we have that survives, the reason why it survives is that because it has a benefit. We are holding onto it because in some way it still serves us until it all breaks down, until it no longer serves us, and then we have to just like start all over with something else.
When you're working with a woman who's kind of sitting in this exact place, they know that the work is killing them, but they can't let go of the version of themselves that is very successful at it. How do you work with her? What do you say to her?
That's a really complicated question because it depends on the woman and on her motivation. It's a matter of rebuilding a little bit of self-esteem, of allowing the other person to be imperfect and showing the other person that you can be imperfect and still survive the imperfection. Because I feel like when we get attached to jobs, we get attached to identities. And it's so hard for us to let go of that identity that keeps us up here because we cannot survive to be even a little bit down here. Or maybe we cannot survive the fact that we think when we have certain place, we have a little bit of power. And in most cases, especially if that job impacts us in a bad way, we don't have that much power. Um, I had this client at some point, and she was like learning her fifth language, and she was trying really hard to learn her fifth language. And it was taking a lot of her mental space, and she was working, and she was doing this, and she was like doing a lot of things. And at some point, I told her, look, if you're telling me you're learning all of these languages and you're really good at it, and we were just met down the street, I would say to you, oh, that's really cool. And I'll be impressed for 2 seconds, and then I'm going to move on with my life. But you have spent years for that. That's really cool comment. And I think is helping women realize that even the validation they get is so fleeting because you can spend years at something to have this position and have a conversation with a friend or someone new and say, I have this position, I have been doing this for I don't know how many years. And the other person says, cool, that's so nice. But it's like a 5 minute tops reaction. And you have worked so hard for something that is so fleeting.
That's a good example. And I'll use myself as an example again here, because I think just walk away from it sounds like a great piece of advice until you try it, which I did. I spent 30 years in my high pressure job and I was very good at it. I made decent money at it, but the cost to me was my health, right? The part that I want our listeners to hear is something that you said on our call. The reason it took me getting a heart condition was that I was good at it. I had been sicker than I'd ever been in my life before I could believe that I had permission to leave.
Mm-hmm.
For the woman listening right now who is also good at it, who is being paid well for it, but is quietly being killed by it, what's the difference between the woman who actually walks away and the woman who keeps telling herself, just one more year?
With every healing journey, we don't really have a view of what's coming next. We only have this scarce idea of maybe it can be a little bit better, and then we work towards that. I don't even know how it's going to be, but I have this tiny hope that my life could survive this. And even though I don't have any idea of what's going to happen next, if I have a little bit of trust into this new possibility, then I think it's the beginning of a change. And I think what makes people more likely to leave a situation like that is to be flexible and have just a tiny bit of hope. For most people, it's also a matter of safety. It's really easy to say, just leave your job. But again, that person needs safety. And there has to be a conversation around, okay, what do you fear you leave that? And how we can build an ecosystem that still fulfills your needs, even when that job is not. Maybe the support system that we build is not going to be as strong as what your job gave you, but maybe it's going to be good enough. Are you afraid of the financial part? Okay, let's look at things and make a plan. Are you afraid of what your friends are going to say, about what your husband or your partner is going to say? Okay, let's look at that. I think more than anything, when you're in a situation like that, you need a little bit of certainty. Just tiny. It doesn't have to be a lot, because it's way easier to move to something if you feel a little bit safe about what's coming next.
I do want to return to the idea of emotional safety in a minute, but I wanted to switch gears a little bit to make sure everyone who's listening has the same vocabulary for the rest of this conversation. Because for some of our listeners, attachment style is something that you can chat about at a dinner party, but for some of them, this might be the first time anyone's actually talked about it or explained it. Can you tell us what attachment theory is in kind of plain language, and why does it matter?
Okay, I'm going to try to tie it to the positivity part and so on, because a certain type of attachment actually has links to that. So, an attachment style is a learned set of responses that are created in relationship to our early caregivers. Basically, in a relationship with our caregivers, we learn whether the world is safe, under what conditions it's safe, whether our needs are going to get met, under what conditions are going to get met, if they get met. We're going to learn what we have to do to get attention. Do we have to cry a lot? We don't cry at all. We also learn about ourselves, because if we have a caregiver that doesn't meet our needs, we're going to think about ourselves that we are not good enough, because it's really dangerous for a child to think about a parent that the parent is not good enough, because that means we're even in greater danger, because we are completely dependent on the parent. So we put the blame on us to adapt, and we adapt to the relational style of a parent, and we're kind of trying to behave in a way that brings the best outcome from our parents. So we learn that, and that kind of becomes automatic. So in our later relationships, whether romantic or platonic, we start interacting with the world thinking that that's the way you interact with the world. Because I have this backlog of experience, and if I want to get my needs met, if I want to be safe, I had to behave in a certain way. And as I said before, we are going to gravitate towards people who match our way of interacting and who are going to be much like our parents. Because if I'm really anxious and I'm texting someone all the time and I'm calling them at 12 at midnight, I'm going to reject a type of person, and a type of person is going to be annoyed with me, but that person is going to stay. So we naturally filter out based on our past experiences. And with attachment styles, where I think it relates to part of productivity and overfunctioning, is that two attachment styles, namely the anxious one and the disorganized one, think about themselves that they're not good enough. The anxious attachment style says, I am not good enough, you are good enough, means most people are going to be put on a pedestal, and I'm going to try to work really hard for you to like me. And the disorganized one says, I'm not good enough, but you're not good enough either. It means that I'm going to try really hard to get my validation, but I'm not going to trust you. The avoidant one thinks they are good enough, but the other person is not good enough. This usually happens with caregivers that are quite neglectful. So the child ends up believing that nobody's going to fulfill their needs. So I can never rely on the other person. Only I'm good enough. The other person is never good enough because it's dangerous. I've learned it's really dangerous to depend on others because they're always going to disappoint me. And the secure one is the ideal one, in which when we were children, our parents, a proportion of only like 30, 40% of the time, were really attuned to us. And we learned that, hey, this other person pays attention to me in a consistent manner. I don't have to cry a lot. I don't have to do that much. I get the food, I get the love, and I learn about myself that I'm good enough and the other person is good enough. So I have trust in myself and I have good self esteem, and I have trust that the other person is also nice and kind and is going to be there for me.
That is a lot to unpack. I had always thought of attachment as like the way you behave inside a relationship, how anxious you get, how avoidant you get, but you're telling us something a little different. You're telling us attachment doesn't shape just how we are in a relationship. It actually wires us into being attracted to certain people in the first place. And that's the part that kind of breaks my heart a little bit. Without this understanding, women just call this pattern destiny, or that's who I always end up with. That's just my luck. What do you think it takes for someone to actually see that pattern instead of always living in it?
Thankfully, we now have access to a lot of information. Uh, I don't think you get to see it by yourself. I think at some point you just realize something is not working. Because when I stumbled upon this, I didn't have the vocabulary for it. I didn't have the vocabulary for the fact that I was feeling a lot of anxiety, that I had low self esteem, and I was putting others on a pedestal. So I think it's really good that we have access to information. I I think it's about really asking yourself if you have a reoccurring pattern. If you always think about yourself in ways that are not helpful, then maybe it's worth investigating. Because, for example, the destiny of the anxiously attached person is to end up with people who are sort of unavailable. It's a paradox. They really want to be loved, they really want to have someone there, but usually the someone that they pick cannot give them that. So I think women who end up with people who are a little bit older, people who have commitment issues, it's really hard for them to have the other person actually put the label on the relationship. Or if they are in a relationship, they're not really emotionally available. They're just sort of there. For the avoidant attachment, their destiny, so to speak, is um, never finding the one because nobody's good enough. They are amazing flaw finders. And the moment someone gets really close, their attachment deactivates because it's their fear. Oh no, this person is going to betray me like my caregiver did. So it's really a deep form of sabotage that happens. And it just sort of ends most relationships because they end up believing the other person is not right. How could they be right? Because why am I losing attraction? Why am I so mad at them? And for the disorganized attachment, I think the telltale for women would be like relationships that are really tumultuous. Now we're breaking up. Now we're getting back together. Now we're breaking up. Now we're getting back together. Because with the disorganized attachment, there's a deep longing for connection. But when the other person comes close, there is a fear of that connection. So we have this depth of even attraction. So we feel that, hey, maybe I made a mistake, and then we break up. And then I start really missing the other person again because now it's far away and I'm no longer threatened by intimacy. Then I get back together. And so, it just goes on.
Yeah, I can see how even though we all have plenty of access to information, working with a coach like you could be very beneficial in understanding our own patterns and then how to break out of them. How flexible is attachment? Like, can a woman in her 40s and 50s actually move from insecure to secure, or are we permanently who we were as kids?
It's quite flexible, but it needs two ingredients. First of all, is the desire to look at yourself and get out of that paradigm in a sense that you would have to learn about your responses, your triggers, and be the type of person who is like, okay, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not going to be perfect. But now I dedicate a little bit of time to getting to know myself. It's not just this mysterious thing that happens to me. Now I'm excited and I can look around and truly see what's happening and truly see even what kind of people I attract and who I'm attracted to. And the second piece that again is very important is, aside from psychoeducation, is having a secure attachment to someone who models that secure attachment to you. And this is where I think coaching has a really big role in this, because your attachment comes along in any relationship. It's really easy to see a romantic relationship because the intensity is really high, but I have the same attachment. Everyone has the same attachment in every relationship. So it's really easy to work with someone in a relationship because you're going to project the same thing. Someone who is avoidant is going to have less access to emotions, is going to want to put more distance, is going to struggle in a therapeutical relationship, coaching sort of type of relationship as in any other. The same with someone who's anxious, which is actually a good thing, because that means you can work on it on every relationship. And something I always recommend is that, and when you're starting to work on this and you're learning about attachment styles and you want to see how you react and why you react and maybe start modeling more secure behaviors, I think friendship is a great starting point. Like if you feel that your friend is not really there for you or you don't know how to set a boundary, it's so much easier to exercise that in friendships because usually the intensity is lower and you can build that confidence. Like, look, I did that. I didn't react the same way.
You've given me hope that there's something that you can do if you don't feel like you're securely attached or able to have good relationships. Now, the women listening to this show are often in transition. They're going through a divorce or an empty nest, or their parents' health is failing. There's a career pivot. There's a version of themselves that they no longer recognize. And what I see, both in my own life and in the women that I work with, is that those transitions don't just shake the present, they reach back and they dig up things that we thought we had dealt with 20 years ago. From your vantage point as a clinician and a coach, what is a major life transition doing to a woman's attachment system?
I wouldn't say it changes attachment because what changes our attachment is the experiences we have, the relationships we have. But I would say that, for example, it can deepen certain wounds, especially if the transition is, for example, a divorce, because someone after a divorce may experience that as the crowning jewelry of, oh no, this never works for me. Oh no, I'm so helpless. And after a long-term relationship, many people kind of turn a little bit more avoidant. They suppress their emotions. They feel more disenchanted with life, which I think it's a very natural response to a loss. But again, I also think that transitions are a great opportunity for growth because it shows us that, hey, I was just doing something I learned from others to do something that wasn't really adaptive. I was just using the wrong tools. And with the wrong tools, I got in the wrong place. And now I can look back and I can reverse engineer things. And next time, I'm going to end up in a better place. It's just that obviously it's easier said than done because there's a lot of grief with any type of loss. There's a lot of grief with aging parents, and there's a lot of grief with having parents that maybe are not as interested as you are in repairing a relationship or improving a relationship. So yeah, things can be hard to navigate. But I also think that because shocks are so powerful, that burst of energy can be really channeled towards something completely different and positive.
Now, in my own coaching work, the through line that I keep coming back to is moving women from survival mode into self trust, from a nervous system that's been scanning for threats for 30 years and into a body that can actually rest and decide and trust itself. You think about this through the lens of the survival responses: flight, freeze, and fawn. Can you please walk our listeners through what each one of those is like?
Sure. So, much like attachment, the way we respond to threats is something that we found adaptive at a certain point in time. So, a very resilient, robust, healthy nervous system can easily transition between all of these and has an appropriate response. There is no bad response. I would say there is only a response that's not adaptive to the situation, because if someone's trying to mug me, it's actually good if I can fight back or just flee. So it just depends on the context. Things can become a little bit muddy when I am lashing out at a coworker when they had made a really small comment and my response is really not proportional with what happened. Or maybe if I get stressed out, then I'm lashing out at my loved ones. That will be the fight response. When we manage with threats, sometimes threats to our self-esteem, they don't have to be physical, just feeling threatened. And we react by controlling others, trying to control them, or simply by attacking them, quote unquote. We start fights, we pick fights, we pick, you did this, you did that, we start criticizing them, and that's how we metabolize that threat. The flight one, I think it's really makes sense for highly productive women, because a lot of people who are in flight actually run into work. I'm really stressed out. I don't want to think about that, but I have this thing that I'm really good at, and I'm going to really focus on that. Like, that's my thing. And I don't want to hear about anything else. I don't want to hear about a fight that I have with a friend. I don't want to deal with this or deal with that. I just pick a lane and I literally flee into it. And that's my lane. So flight is not about running from the threat in another place. And then we have fawn, which is basically negotiating with the threat. So instead of fighting or fleeing, we're literally battling after the other person. We are sacrificing our own needs just to make peace. And again, it's about threat removal. And the way we learn to remove threat is by sacrificing our own needs and saying yes to things that are actually a big no. And in the moment, it works. But in the long term, it just eats away at us. The freeze response is when we collapse in front of the threat. The threat is so big, we cannot conceptualize how to move around it. A lot of behaviors where you simply don't take any action. Let's say that you have a really big thing to work on and you cannot focus at all, and you start watching 5 episodes from a TV show. You are completely doing something else, or maybe daydreaming. You're just sitting there almost frozen, daydreaming, but you're doing it out of anxiety because you feel like you can't deal with that. So anything that basically puts you in a literal state of freeze, you're doing something to distract yourself, but not in the productive way of the flight type.
I think Most of us could probably recognize those responses in the various relationships that we've had and even in ourselves. I think a lot of women listening now are going to recognize themselves in the fawn response, especially.
Mm-hmm.
They say yes when they should say no, the peacekeeping that costs them themselves. What is the path out of that for someone who always fawns?
I have, I guess, the controversial take on it. I think what happens with the fawn response in the long term is that we express anger. Uh, we never allow ourselves to be angry at the situation or at the person, and we are sacrificing our needs continuously. And what tells me is that that person never quite felt safe to display anger. And by anger, I mean simply being annoyed or placing a boundary. I'm not talking about throwing plates. Uh, Simply saying that really assertive no at some point in her life, maybe that was maybe that was like the cutting off a relationship. Maybe there was a parent who couldn't take a no. How dare you tell me no? I'm your parent. I'm telling you what to do. So I think it's realizing that as an adult, not as a child who is dependent on a caregiver, it's safe to feel a little bit of that resentment of like, oh no, I have to work 2 hours extra because that person did this and did that. Instead of just like begrudgingly doing it, really allowing yourself to feel that emotion. How does it feel? Really? When you took upon that and now you're working for free just because that person didn't do their job.
So, circling back to that idea of safety, you had previously told me that the goal isn't to make the environment perfectly safe, which is probably impossible anyway, but the goal is to build enough confidence inside yourself that you can meet life even when it isn't safe. Can you say more about that?
All of the trauma responses can be adapted, and we all have access to them to various extents. The only problem that can arise is if we get stuck into one, and then we use it when the context doesn't really fit with the response. And going back to safety, I think what makes our nervous system really flexible is the idea that, hey, I have options. And in order to think that you have options, you have to think about yourself as a person who is a little bit capable. Someone who is like, okay, now my coworker did this. What would be the best action forward for me, not just for my coworker? Is it better to do the work? Is it better to assert myself? Assertiveness is the good part of the fight response. Would it be better if I just switch the conversation to something else and I pretend I didn't hear what that person told me and then I'm skipping work that way? I think it's about having that self trust that as an adult, I can do, I have more options. I don't have to stick in only one lane. I have more options. I think that would be my response.
You've given us a lot to think about and even some things that we can do. Before we close, though, I want to make sure that listeners know exactly how to find you and how to work with you if they want to. For the woman who recognized herself in this conversation and wants to keep going with you, where does she find you?
So you can check out my website at pastthepass.com, where I have a form there where you can learn how to work with me. And I also have email address if you want to contact me directly.
Can you tell us a little bit about Past the Past, your Substack?
I chose the title because I feel that most patterns are going back to past experiences, and bettering our lives is basically taking control of the patterns of our past. Even in my personal life, my triumph was going past the past, going past the conditioning, going past all of the events that taught me all of those bad coping mechanisms and being able to transcend the past into the present.
That's really beautiful. So, the offer I want to make sure listeners hear is your free 15-minute coaching call. Can you tell us who that's for and then what happens in it?
It's about getting to know each other. I work with highly functional women who are struggling with nervous system regulation, as we talked about, the rigidity of the 4 trauma responses. And I also work with women who want to have a secure attachment, women who maybe find themselves hard to commit in relationship. Maybe they are the persons that are picking the flaws, or maybe they are choosing partners that are not really that, interested in committing. Maybe they find themselves constantly in situationships that never end up to a relationship. Or maybe they find themselves even in long-term relationships that are not really satisfying. Some needs are getting met, others are not getting met. And in a way, they are trying to make sense out of that sense of destiny. They want to be in more control of what happens to them. They're not just like floating through life. They have an idea of what's going on.
For our listeners, I want to add something here on my end. I am not a relationship specialist. I'm more of a transition specialist. So if you've been listening today and you've recognized that the work in front of you is specifically about your relationship patterns, the attachment piece, the partner piece, the family of origin piece, Miriam is who I'd refer you to. The link to her free 15-minute call is in the show notes, and I'd take her up on it. Now, there is one last question that I always end with, and it's this. If a woman listening today takes only one message away from this whole conversation, what do you hope that is?
I hope women come to the conclusion that being perfect is a fantasy that keeps you fighting, but it never arrives to a place. I think we are so afraid of letting go of the things that make us feel in control of our lives, the things that make us feel as close as we can be towards perfection. And we think that's power. And I want to challenge that. I think that true power is living the fantasy that we can be perfect. We're not going to be perfect, not for every person, not for every company, not for anyone. We're always going to have people who see us and really appreciate us. And we're going to have people who don't like us. We're going to have companies that don't hire us. And we're going to have periods in our lives where we experience distress. And that's a period. It doesn't have to be always perfect. It doesn't have to be always a straight line. And I think that fantasy is really hard to let go of because it does bring a lot of power. It makes you feel like you're striving towards something good. Like that's the fight we're fighting. But I don't think there's any power to it. I think it's far more powerful to allow people to love you as you are instead of fighting for the love of people.
You know, you came on this show because of a social media comment, and what came out of that comment was this whole conversation. So I'm so grateful for you. For our listeners, if today's episode hit something in you, here's what I want you to do. Go follow Miriam on Threads at Getting Past Your Past and check out her Substack at pastthepast.com. The link for her free 15-minute call is in the show notes. If you've been nodding through this whole episode, that call is your next move. Don't make this another episode that you listen to and then go right back to performing harder. The whole point of this conversation is that performing harder is what got most of us here in the first place. If you want to keep going with me, please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform and to the comeback letter on my Substack. And if this episode meant something to you, please share it with a woman in your life who needs to hear these messages. And please consider leaving a 5-star review. It really does help more women find the show. Thanks for spending this time with us. I'm Jenn Fast.
Thank you.
And I'll see you next time on The Comeback Show.